relationship between anything that happened in your past and your present moment. You can decide at this moment that that was then, this is now. And you can go in a different direction. And your grades have no relevance. Forbes does the Forbes 400 every single year, and they do brief biographies of people in the Forbes 400. They found that people who dropped out of high school, if they make it to the Forbes 400, the 400 richest men and women in America, they will be worth, on average, $300 million more than people who graduated from college, if they dropped out of high school and they made it. People in the Forbes 400, they found that people who dropped out of high school, and they said, why is that? Well, they started earlier and they started harder. And they got much smarter, much faster. They had a big leap on people who are still going to college, drinking, and so on. They're already there starting their third or fourth or fifth business because they dropped out of high school. So if you got lousy grades at school, you should say, thank God I got lousy grades at school. Because that's the key to your success. All right, so anyway, my first job was a laboring job. I was washing dishes. I washed dishes, and then finally when I lost that job, I got a job washing cars with a car wash, and when I lost that job, I got a job washing floors with a janitorial service. I thought washing was in my future. My wife is very kind about that. She keeps giving me things to wash, dishes, children's bottoms, things like that. And lost when you're young is a euphemism for non-voluntary career redeployment. This is where you get a chance to explore new careers unexpectedly. Today they have severance programs to the end of the month. The severance program was to the end of the day. Or sometimes the end of the hour. They used to fire you at either 5 to 12 or 5 to 5. I know because I had experiences of both. And they come up to you looking like you'd been sentenced to death and they were the executioner, and they say, we won't need your services anymore, here's your final pay, there's the door. So I'd go from place to place, and I'd say, I'm looking for a job, and they say, well, we don't need much help right now. I say, well, I'm the right person for you, because I won't be much help. And that wasn't helping me much. And I went from place to place, desperate, lined up for employment, did day labor, worked as a gardener. I dug ditches. I worked as a construction laborer, carrying heavy things from place to place. I worked in sawmills, stacking lumber. I worked in the brush with a chainsaw. One summer, I dug wells. Now, digging wells is like a metaphor for government service. That's where you start at ground level, and you work down rather than up. And when you succeed, you fail, because when you find water, they fire you. What's that? Looks like water. Well, cover it up. We need 2 more days' work here. Well diggers are not highly motivated, because if they find water, they put themselves out of work. It's like in the government, you're allowed to tinker with problems endlessly, but never solve one. Because if you solve a problem, then you put otherwise unemployable people out of work. So I would go from place to place. I worked on farms and ranches. When I was 23 years old, I was an itinerant farm laborer. I was sleeping on the hay in the farmer's barn. I was arising before dawn each morning and working all day to get the harvest in before the first frost. I ate with the farmer's family in the kitchen of the farmhouse. I was uneducated, I was unskilled, and at the end of the harvest, I was once more unemployed. And when I could no longer get a laboring job, how many people here are in sales? Well, that's what I got into too, when I couldn't get a laboring job, so I know where you're coming from. Yeah. And so I got into selling, and I was not afraid to work. Did you notice that selling is clean work? It's not digging ditches, it's not farm labor, it's clean work. So they gave me the 3-part sales training program, which is pretty much what we get in life. Here's your cards, here's your brochures, there's the door. After 1 month, they give you the first motivational program, which is, hang in there. After 2 months, they give you the real motivational program, is they sit you down and they look at you quite grimly and they say, look, if you don't sell something, pretty soon we'll have to fire you. They're not even paying you anything. You're working on straight commission, cold calling, and they're going to fire you. You don't even have a desk. Now, that sometimes makes you so mad you go out and sell something just to spite them. All right? Well, I was hanging on by my fingernails. After about 6 months, it's a really important point for me. After about 6 months of hanging on by my fingernails, when I made a sale, I had to have the commission immediately, because I had to get back to my boarding house. I was paying a couple of dollars a night for a room in a boarding house, and I had an ex-Gestapo landlady. Her motto was no pay, no stay, no credit, nothing. So finally, there's this one guy in our company. He's making 5 or 10 times as much as anybody else. He's got a pocket full of $20 bills that would choke a horse. I get up at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm out there in the parking lot at 7 o'clock when people come to work. I'm working all day. I take a brief lunch, dinner between 5 and 6, and I go and knock on doors and apartment doors in the neighborhoods after dinner until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. If the light was on, I'd knock on the door. I even woke people up in their pajamas to try to sell to them. Not a good start for a sales conversation. And this guy would roll in around 9 o'clock. Prospect would come in around 9:15. They'd sit down, have a nice little chat, cup of coffee. He'd talk to him a little bit, write some on paper, and pull out his check and write a check. And he'd go out in the morning, he'd make a couple of sales, come back, have lunch with a customer, make another sale, make a couple of sales. I was making one sale a week. This guy was selling with both hands like a faro dealer in Reno. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I finally, and everybody looked at him, and great awe. So finally I went to him and I said, tell me, what are you doing differently from me? How come you make so many sales? And he said, well, show me your presentation, I'll critique it for you. I said, you show me yours and I'll show you mine. I said, by the way, how do you define a sales presentation? He said, well, a sales presentation is a logical and orderly process where, first of all, you separate prospects from suspects. You then establish rapport with them. You don't try to make friends with people who have no money, I mean, obviously, or not qualified. You then identify their needs by asking them questions. You show that our product or service is the very best, all things considered, to satisfy their needs. You answer their questions or objections. You get them to take action, and then you get resales and referrals from the same people, which loops you back into prospecting. I couldn't believe it. I was writing this all the time. There's a logical process to it. I couldn't believe there was a logical process to it. I was using the blah, blah cell. Blah, 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 blah. I was hoping people would stop me and buy, and nobody was. So I wrote it all down. I said, well, don't you say this? He said, no, you don't say this. You ask questions. And so I realized that telling is not selling. Asking questions is selling. So I went out and I began to ask questions, and I would go through a logical process and make sure it was a prospect before I began talking, and then take some time to get to know them a little bit better so that we had a feeling of rapport and so on, and then identified their needs, and my sales started to inch up. And then I said, well, what else can I do? He said, have you read any books on selling? I said, are there books on selling? Well, there's thousands of books on selling. They've been written by some of the best salespeople in the history of the world. So I went out and began reading 1 to 2 hours every single morning. I'd get up at 5 o'clock and read 2 hours every morning and take notes and write them on 3x5 cards and carry them around with me. And I learned what to say and how to answer objections, how to get appointments, and how to work on the telephone. And my sales began to go up. And then I began to listen to audio programs. I still remember my first audio programs on sales. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. Here's somebody who worked for 30 years, trained 20,000 salespeople, was able to make sales, go into a town with 350 homes and make 346 sales, cold calling, knocking on doors. And just he explained, this is the psychology of selling. And then I began to go to courses like this. And every single time I took the information, I took action on it immediately. Now this is so important. You know, many are called, but few are chosen. You've heard that. Many people hear these things, but they don't do anything about it. If it was just information that enabled a person to be successful, all librarians would be rich. Because they're surrounded with information, but they don't act on the information. So what I did is I try it out. And then sometimes it didn't work. And by the way, here's something that changed my life. I found that if you try something new for the first time, it doesn't work. Most things don't work anyway. My friend Charlie Jones would tell you that nothing works. But most things don't work the first time you try them out. Peter Drucker says this: most business ideas fail at least the first few times. But what you have to do is try it and try it again and try it again. So I would learn a way to answer an objection or to get an appointment or something else that wouldn't work. I tried again, it wouldn't work. I finally made a decision which changed my life, and I pass it on to you. I would try something 10 times before I pass judgment on it. If it was a good idea, I'd give it 10 tries before I pass judgment. I wouldn't try it once and quit, because that's what everybody else does. Either that or they don't try it at all. So I try it 10 times, and I'd rush out. I learned something new in the morning, I'd rush out and I'd say, I'm going to talk to 10 people today, I'm going to try it on all 10. And this is what I found. If it's a good idea, about the 5th or 6th or 7th time, it'll start to work. And then you own it. It becomes an arrow in your quiver. It's a piece of knowledge, it's a piece of skill that you have at the skin level, and you have it for the rest of your career. So I began to practice, and my sales went up and up and up until they made me a sales mangler. They said, you know, whatever you're smoking, find some other people and share it with them because it's working. And so I began recruiting people. I ran ads in the paper and I recruited people and I took them in and I taught them to sell and they went out. And today, all over the world, I meet millionaires and multimillionaires, people who run industries, run multiple industries, who I literally started on the street with no money, stone broke. One of my best guys was in jail. I had to bail him out of jail, get a lawyer, get him off the charges, pay his fine, dress him, and teach him how to sell. Today he's worth about $25 million. I had breakfast with him last year, and we were talking. I called him up. He lives a long way away. Called him up. We had breakfast, and I said, I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished. He's a major power in his community, owns multiple businesses. He's very high up in several of the major organizations. I said, you've done so much with your life. It's phenomenal. He said, yeah. And he looks like this. He said, and And I still remember where I started. It was in that jail that you bailed me out of all those years ago. It's not in his bio, by the way. It's not mentioned there. Anyway, so what I found was that you can learn anything you need to learn to achieve any goal that you want for yourself. Now, here's an important point. And for instance, if I asked Dale said to me, Brian, would you give me a call later on this week? And I said, sure, I'll give you a call later on this week. And I'll walk away. Well, what would Dale say? Well, don't you want my phone number? I say, no. What, you live in Phoenix? Phoenix is pretty good. This is simple. Just certain numbers. I'll just punch the buttons till I get through. Punch. Dale, is that you? No? Again, punch. Dale, is that you? No, punch. It's only 7 digits plus an area code. Hey, what could be harder than that, huh? Is that you? Now, how long would it take me to get through to Dale if I just punched the buttons at random? It never would. It's hundreds of thousands of millions of words. Do you know how many Social Security numbers we have? Made up of what? 4, 2, 3, 9 digits? Here's 10 digits. In other words, hundreds of millions. I would never get through to Dale. But what if Dale gave me his number and it was 235 1234 and I wrote it down. I got the area code. I could dial Dale from anywhere in the world. And if he was there, I'd get through. And I could give Dale's number. It's Gail. Karen, I'm sorry, give it to Karen. Karen could call. I'll give it to you. You could call. If you had the right number, you could get through. Isn't that true? In other words, if you have the number in the right sequence, you can dial from anywhere and you'll get through. But now what if they'll give you the number and it's the last 4 digits are 1, 2, 3, 4, and I wrote them down 1, 3, 2, 4. I got 1 digit out of place. Now that's not very much. You know, 1 crummy digit. I mean, we're talking about, 10 numbers here and 1 digit. I shouldn't be penalized for that, should I? But if I tried to get through to Dale with the wrong digits in the wrong order, would I get through? What if I was sincere and hardworking and I set goals and I came to Jim Rohn's seminars and I read books and listened to tapes and I loved the Lord and paid my taxes and was a good family person, but I wasn't dialing the numbers in the right sequence? Would I ever get through? No. This is why people fail, is they may know the right numbers, but they don't have them in the right sequence. Here's an interesting question. If you went to the university, for example, to get a degree in engineering, could you take any courses you wanted? Could you say, well, I'll take a few of these courses after 4 years. Well, I'll take a whole bunch of courses. I like my degree now. They'd laugh in your face, wouldn't they? If you go to get a degree in any subject, what do you have to do? You have to take certain courses in order, in sequence, some before and some after. Some are prerequisites and so on. You have to take the courses in sequence. Only when you've passed all the required courses in sequence do you get your degree. But you get your degree automatically if you've done the courses. That's the key to success. If you want to be successful in real estate or in building your own business, most people run their own business like broken teeth. In other words, they know a little bit about this and a little bit about that and a bit about this, and they can make a couple of sales and negotiate some purchases and so on and so forth. And 86% of business owners in America make less than they would earn if they were working for wages with someone else. Why? It's because they have not learned the entire sequence of building and operating a business. And yet you look at the Fortune 500 companies that are multi-billion-dollar companies, almost everyone started on a kitchen table. You find that one way or another they've learned all the necessary steps, and they do them in the proper sequence. And if you start to do things in the proper sequence, you get through every single time. Are you with me so far? This is really important. It's the difference between success and failure. Anyway, so imagine you went to the dentist and the dentist decided to drill before putting in the anesthesia. I mean, what's wrong with that? I mean, the anesthesia, early in the drilling, later in the drilling. Would this be a good dentist? No, there's a sequence, for Christ's sakes. Well, how about they drill before they do any x-rays? Let's drill before we do any x-rays. So who knows what tooth needs it? Let's drill them all, you know. That's what people do in selling. They just collar them all. What the heck? Who knows? Anyway, I'm not going to get serious. So what I learned is that there's a proper order and sequence. And what I learned was this, and it changed my life. What I learned was the law of cause and effect. Now, the law of cause and effect is called the granddaddy law. It's the iron law of the universe. It says that for every effect in your life, there's a cause. That everything happens for a reason. It says that success is not an accident. Failure is not an accident. Everything happens for a reason. And if you can be clear about the effect that you want, which is why Jim and Dennis talk so much about goals, and I will later, is if you can be clear about the effect that you want, you can trace it back to someone who at one time did not have that effect, and then find out what they did, and do the same thing over and over again until you get the same result. As my friend Nito says, success leaves tracks. If you want to follow a person in the snow, you put your feet in their tracks. If you want to find a successful person, if you want to become wealthy, success leaves tracks. Follow the tracks. You got most people who want to become wealthy are trying to make their own trail. You know, don't go where every other person has gone. Go to where no one has gone and blaze a new trail. Yeah. You know what they call a pioneer? A pioneer is someone lying face down in the dirt with their back full of arrows. You know, that's not your goal. If you want to be successful, what you do is you find out hundreds of thousands of millions of people who started from nothing and become wealthy, and you do the same thing. Only after you reach the end of their trail do you begin to make your own trail. But you don't start making your own trail at the beginning. So you do what they do over and over again, and here's what I've learned. Nobody's smarter than you, and nobody's better than you. Nobody's smarter than you, nobody's better. People who are on the fast track are not better than you, they're not smarter than you, some are dumber than you, some have fewer talents, fewer abilities, less intelligence, less opportunities, but they're doing the cause and effect relationships. They're learning from other people. I've spoken to many people who've come over to this country from other countries. I'll give you a great story. I could tell you so many stories. I was doing a talk in Los Angeles. We were doing an infomercial that was being videotaped. They had a studio audience. And during the break, one of the gentlemen in the studio audience stood up and said, I'd like to explain why I'm here to be in this audience while Brian Tracy is making this film. And he was from Pakistan. And he was beautifully dressed. And he stood up. He said, I am from Pakistan. He spoke very well. He said, I came over to the United States 3 years ago. He said, my uncle and my brother had signed my paper, so he was legal. So he said, I came over here to work with them in their company, and by the time I got everything cleared and I'd gone to university and cleared up and come here, their company had gone broke, and they both moved away in different directions. When I arrived in Los Angeles, they were gone. I knew nobody, and I was penniless. He said, I didn't know what to do. He said, I had no idea how to succeed in America. He said, and I was walking along, and one day I walked past the University of Southern California, UCLA, and I had gone to university in Karachi, and I knew a little bit about university, so I sort of drifted onto the campus. I didn't even have a place to stay. He was essentially homeless. He was carrying all of his stuff in a bag. He said, and he went to the dining room where they line up at the cafeteria and they leave their food, and he would sit down next to somebody, and when they were finished, he'd slip over and he'd eat what they hadn't eaten, and this was a good way to get food, and he started to sleep in the bushes on the UCLA campus. In the daytime, he would bundle up his stuff. He'd wash in the bathrooms. He'd hang around the university. He looked like a homeless person, dirty, unkempt, ragged, lousy clothes, typical student. He said nobody didn't even stand out. After he'd been doing this for 2 or 3 weeks, he'd been hanging around the campus, and he was just in despair. He finally went to the counselor, and he said, I need some advice. The counselor said, what's your student number? He said, well, we don't have a student number. The counselor said, well, I can't give you. He told all this story. I'm just fascinated. He said, I can't give you advice or counseling because I have to log in the people that I work with. He said, well, what is the problem? He said, well, I came from Pakistan. He told him his story. He said, I don't know what to do. He said, well, the only thing I can do for you is I will give you this set of Brian Tracy audio programs to listen to. It's a true story. He said, but you can't take them away. I'll give you a tape player. You can sit in this room over here, and you can listen to them and take notes. So he didn't have a lot going, if you know. So he said, okay, I'll do that. To him, it was completely bizarre, listening to a bunch of audio cassettes in a cubicle. So he took them over and he sat them down. He got notes from the wastebaskets, and he began making notes. He came back every day for a week. He listened to the programs hour after hour and wrote notes on how to succeed in America. He said, went back at the end of the week, he gave it back to me, he said, thank you. He said, now I understand how you succeed in this country. He walked out. He said, that was 2.5 years ago. He walked in. He said, I drove my new Mercedes to this filming. He said, I own 2 companies. I'm worth $2.5 million. He was wearing a Giorgio Armani suit. He had a Rolex watch. It's beautifully turned out. He said, I have a beautiful home. He said, I have 2 businesses. I'm just starting a 3rd. He said, now I know how it works. And now I can do it over and over again. Now, that is a great story from a person coming from absolutely nothing, and it's a true story, by the way. It's one of those stories that it wasn't true. It should be. Okay. But it's word for word true. Anyway, so the law of cause and effect says that if you do what other successful people do, you get the same results they will. But if you don't do what other successful people do, nothing can help you. So your job and my job, and this changed my whole life. Chris mentioned I had started, built, managed, or turned around 22 businesses. I've also consulted with more than 1,000 businesses of every size, Fortune 500 companies in 23 countries. In every single case, I go in order to work with them, I have to study and figure out how this business works. What are the cause and effect relationships? How is money, income, profit generated in this business? What are the constraints that are holding profit back? And so on. And so I've been able to develop a pretty good good intellectual foundation in these companies. But what I found is if you do what other successful people do in an industry, you get the same results. Do you know that in business today, the 80-20 rule applies? Is that 20% of businesses make all the money, and the other 80% are marginal? And they all start off at the same starting line, but 20% make all the money. In our society, 20% of the people make all the money, and the other 80% worry about money all their life. So which would you like to be in, the top 20 or the bottom 80? Top 20. Now make the decision to be in the top 20. Then the only question you ask is, how do you get there? Well, here was the turning point for me. As I began to study philosophy and metaphysics, what I found is that thoughts are causes. Thoughts are causes, and conditions are effects. And when I learned this, I couldn't believe it. Thoughts are causes? You mean my thoughts control the conditions of my life? I want to give you one of the simplest of all mathematical formulations. It's this. 1 equals 1. There's a direct relationship between what you think and what happens to you. The quality of your thinking determines the quality of your life. Your thoughts are causes and your conditions are effects. In other words, you create your own world by the way you think. And the great philosophers, the great metaphysicians, the great mystical teachers and spiritual teachers and all the religions have come to this conclusion, is that you become what you think about most of the time. You become what you think about most of the time. Now you've heard this over and over again, but it's absolutely astonishing. You become what you think about most of the time. So the question I have to ask you is, what do you think about most of the time? What they found, self-made millionaires think about becoming financially independent most of the time, starting at a very early age. And every single financial decision they make throughout their years is, will this help me to be financially independent or not? And if it won't, then I won't do it. I just put it off for now, and I'm going to make the decision that will lead to financial independence. Thin people think about being thin most of the time. Fit people think about being fit. Loving people think about being loving. Happy people think about being happy. Are you with me so far? Yes, so what do you think about most of the time? By the way, this principle is true, but it's not always true, because if it was always true, every young man would turn into a young woman by the age of 20. And fat people would turn into pizzas, okay. But you do become what you think about most of the time. So what they did at the University of Pennsylvania is they took 350,000 people like yourselves and myself, entrepreneurs, ambitious, people in sales, people who are going somewhere with their life, and they interviewed them over a 6, 12, 18, 24-month period, and they did psychographic and demographic tests on them, and they asked them the question, what do you think about most of the time? What do you think about most of the time? Now, I said before that you are in an elite, that you're in the top 10%. And how do we know that? It's because you're here. Only the top 10% of adults will ever come to a seminar like this in their whole lives. In fact, I've met people 40 and 50 years old who have never been to a seminar or an adult learning experience after they left school. They have never been to one. It's almost like this world of continuous learning and upgrading of skills runs parallel. It's a parallel universe to them. They don't even participate in it. Many people that you told you were coming to this couldn't believe it. They couldn't understand. Why on earth would you go to something like that? You know all that stuff. Whenever somebody says to me, I know all that stuff, I say, geez, you must be rich. Geez, you must be rich. Could I borrow a mill from you? Because if you know all that stuff, you must be awfully rich. And they look away as they go to catch their bus home. You know. Anyway, so you're in the top 10% because you're here, because you can always tell who a person is by looking at what they do. It's not what they say or wish or hope or attend or declare when they are accepting the nomination at the primary. It's only what they do which is the true test of who they really are. Remember this, there's an awful lot of attempt to fool people by saying, watch my hand, watch my hand. Don't ignore what I do, just watch what I promise to do. No, always just watch what a person does, because what a person does is the true expression of their real values. Only action is action. Anyway, so if the fact that you're here means that you're in the top 10%, not because of thoughts or feelings or wishes or hopes or intentions, but because you're here. You've made the supreme effort and sacrifice to be here. You've made a decision like crossing that line in the Alamo, I'm in the top 10%. Whether you knew it or not doesn't matter. Now you do. You're in the top 10%. The only thing you need to do now is to make it a reality. People say, if you knew how much I was making, you wouldn't say I was in the top 10%. Here's one of the great rules. It doesn't matter where you're coming from in life. All that really matters is where you're going. And you've made the decision to be in the top 10%. Is that true? Say yes. Good. Okay, it's just a matter of getting there. Now, So they did this study with 350,000 people like you and I. They sliced and diced them by percentiles, the bottom 10%, next 10%, and they took the top 10%. They found people in the top 10% think differently from people in the bottom 80 or 90% in some very profound and life-changing ways. Now, can you imagine how people think and what people think about most of the time in the top 10%? Can you guess? What do people in the top 10% think about most of the time? Well, you're all correct. Every answer is correct. Let me summarize it. They think about what they want and how to get it most of the time. They think about what they want and how to get it most of the time. Unsuccessful people think about what they don't want, what makes them mad and unhappy today and yesterday and when they were children, and who's to blame. Unhappy, unsuccessful people are always talking about what they don't want and who's to blame. Successful people are always talking about what they do want and how to get it. So I'm going to teach you an operative word. This is a word that you're going to use for the rest of your career. This is the word of the high achiever, the self-made millionaire, the truly successful, positive, happy person. The word is how. Say how. From now on, when you have a goal, the only question you ask is how. If you have a problem, how do you solve it? Have an obstacle, how do you overcome it? Have a financial goal, how do you achieve it? If you have excess weight, how do you get rid of it? If you want to be healthy, how do you achieve it? The only thing you ask is how. Now, whenever you ask the question how, it forces you to take complete control of your life, to accept responsibility. It raises your self-esteem, gives you a sense of personal power and self-confidence. The word how is almost like a miraculous word, because only action-oriented people ask the word how. Everyone else says, what are you going to do? When's it going to happen? Wah, 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 wah. Shut up. The top people say how. We've got a problem. How do we solve it? Wait till she gets in here. She will find a solution. Because they know when you come in, they say, we've got a problem. Good. How do we solve it? What's the problem? What do we do? How do we minimize the damage? How do we solve the problem? Not who's to blame and who did this and who should have done that and everything else. Worry about that later, if at all. For now, let's put the fire out. Right? Top people are people like heads of SWAT teams. They say, oh, those nasty people took that building. What are we going to do? We should pass a law. You know, no. What they do is they say, hit a building, kill them all, let God sort them out. You know. Anyway, I'm sorry. That's old programming. We live in California. We sit under triangles and put crystals in our armpits out here. Okay. Light incense and say Om, Om, and the money will come. Om, Om. Yeah, you're going to get a quarter in this hand, a nickel in that hand, and that's all you're going to. Anyway, So what they found is people in the top 10% are people who think about what they want and how to get it most of the time. And that's what your job is, to think about what you want and how to get it. When I talked about getting off the low road onto the high road, the turning point in your life, we say, look at all those people on that high road. Those people are doing so well in life. How do we get onto that road as well? The very fastest way is you find somebody who's successful and you go and say, how would I get onto the same road you're on? And here's the most wonderful thing. You're surrounded by some of the most wonderful people in America. And I'll tell you this, every person in this room, if you ask them, what advice would you give me to be more successful? They'll tell you the best they've got. They wouldn't give you their third best idea. If you turn to the person next to you and you said, what's the very best idea for success that you would share with me based on your experience, they'll give you the best idea they could think of. Here's an exercise I did. I want you to think about the answer to this question. If someone were to ask you, a young person, say, what is the most important success principle you ever learned? What's the most important success principle you learned to help you to be successful? What answer would you give? I was working with a large company. We were doing an international seminar, and I just spontaneously said, I'll tell you what, if everybody here will just write down their answer, their one word of advice, and bring them up here and just put them on the stage at the break, we will take those and we'll publish them all, and everybody who gives us an answer will get the answers from everybody else. We did that. The company's sales went up 500% in the next 3 years. Because they all had the best success principles for everybody. So if I were to ask you that question, would you have an answer? Yeah. All right. Then what I want you to do is I want you to turn to the person to the right and left of you, and I would say, what would be your answer? What would be the best success principle you could think of if I was to ask you one success idea? What idea would it be? Turn to the person next to you and give them your best idea. Go ahead. Coming back. Now, this is an important question. This is an important question. For the rest of this conference, when you introduce yourself to each other, go up and say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so. What's yours?" What's your best idea? You have had so much experience, there's enough wisdom in this room to make everybody here rich 2 or 3 times over. Isn't that true? So therefore, one of the best things... All right. One of the kindest and most generous things you can do is to share your ideas with other people. So whenever you get into a conversation, say, "What's yours? What's yours?" And this will make a wonderful mastermind conversation. Every time you meet with 2 or 3 people, say, "What's yours?" and share ideas. And write these ideas down. As Jim says, write them down. Don't let them fly away. And we were talking a little bit earlier about the qualities of success, what they found at the University of Pennsylvania.